Hey there, LP here, and today I want to talk to you guys about potential Go Format decks you can bring to an IRL event. With the end of the 2025 Go Format season upon us, but tons of circuits have already announced paper Go Format events across the country for 2026, there is no better time than to get into GOATs right now. For some of you, GOATs may have been what gotten you into Retro Yu-Gi-Oh! In the first place, or maybe you've never even heard of GOATs. Regardless of your depth of understanding of the format, today's video will cover three main components for your consideration when picking a deck. First, we're going to look at GGP top 8 lists from around the globe, provided by GoFormat.com, to get into a glimpse into the paper metagame. Second, we're going to look at things to consider that aren't necessarily the cards themselves, such as tournament structure, policies to be implemented, as well as certain rulings. And then finally, we will address the main question: what decks should you bring to an IRL event? Here, I have a graph containing the meta report from the top 8 lists from GGPs that happen around the globe this season, as well as the Go Format World event. I chose to include Go Format Worlds because GGP participants could qualify for Worlds, even though it wasn't necessarily an in-person tournament. So looking at our chart, we're looking at 9 of the GGPs that happened this season, as well as the Go Format Worlds. So that's 10 events, so that's 10 top 8s, so it's going to be 80 decks we're looking at. So in that 80 deck breakdown, we're going to see that 36 of the 80 slots belong to Chaos Turbo. For those of you unfamiliar with Chaos Turbo, it's a strategy that aims to use draw spells and discard traps to cycle through their deck and enable powerful Chaos monsters while accruing card advantage. Chaos Turbo is typically countered by more aggressive strategies who also can manipulate the graveyard. This is the quintessential strategy you're guaranteed to see at any Go Format event. It encompasses everything that the format has: power 1-ofs, strong boss monsters, and abusive rulings during that era. Of the 14 GGPs that happened, Chaos Turbo won 7 of those events in 2025, solidifying its dominance in the format. The second most represented deck on this chart is going to be Warrior. Warrior took up 17 of the 80 slots on my chart. Warriors is a mid-range deck that utilizes a toolbox of roto-surgical monsters backed by a suite of traps aimed to gain advantage through 1-for-1 and 1-for-2 trades. Warriors are countered by control strategies that use battle traps as well as back or removal. This is the original anti-meta deck. It's also guaranteed to be played at any Go Format event that happens this season. During the 2025 season, Warriors took down 3 GGPs themselves. 2/3 of the average field will be these 2 decks. The rest of the field will be made up of literally anything else. The line between Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 in Go Format is so much smaller than it is in the Advanced Format metagame that it's really easy for less powerful decks to be able to rise to the occasion based on siding patterns, technical play, as well as just what the field has to offer that day. There is one deck that stands above the rest, the ultimate needle mover, in terms of how it impacts the meta. Burn is an aggro deck that aims to stall out the opponent while letting them amass cards that power up their burn traps while simultaneously poking them with powerful beaters. Burn is often countered by other aggro strategies, backer removal, and spell trap negates. Burn's role in the format is to counter Chaos Turbo and act as a foil to Warriors. As less players respect Burn in their side decks, it slowly pushes the needle toward a Burn-heavy meta. As it gains popularity, players will then respect Burn, and it pushes the needle back. We saw this trend early on in the season, as Burn was nowhere near successful or popular, and as that waning carried on, it made sense for a meta pick for the Go Format Worlds, where it took up 3 of the top 8 slots, and all converted into the top 4 and eventually ended in a Burn mirror in the finals. Looking at the rest of our chart, the rest of the field is comprised of a variety of decks whose ultimate main goal was aimed at taking down Chaos Turbo. For example, we're looking at Detroit's second place list, who played an anti-meta Chaos deck featuring Bait Doll, who was way better than every Chaos player in the room because he only lost to the first place finisher, Sean Munn, playing Warriors. While Maryland's GGP winner, Nova Ethos, won the whole thing with a unique anti-meta Thunderclap build. Control decks are the next piece in the puzzle. The reason Control isn't as prevalent as Chaos Turbo, although being a strong counter to Warriors, is because typically Chaos Turbo will end up siding into a control package, a smaller engine for games 2 and 3 to cover their weaknesses, versus having it as a main deck option for games 1. And the last piece of the Go Format meta is any Reasoning Gate deck. While only 3 converted top 8 finishes in these 80 decks, if left unchecked or uncounted for, it can dominate an event. We saw this at the YCS 3v3 when the Stein deck, piloted by Rick Novak, won the whole thing. However, because it was a team event, it holds less bearing than an individual performance. Although it's important to note that Rick said he only dropped 1 match on the day. So that's the metagame going into 2026. So now let's address some procedural considerations. The biggest consideration when we're picking a deck is to look at what rules we're going to use. If it is a GGP event, you're going to follow the GoFormat.com rules. Those include having note-taking allowed for non-mandatory effects, having Swiss rounds at 45 minutes long, going in the time will yield turns 0 through 3, as well as having a top cut of up to top 16 depending on players. Versus, if you go to an event that uses YCS or Konami standards, you're going to have only note-taking for mandatory effects, as well as time will be 50 minutes for each round, and there will be no end of match procedures. It'll be the double match loss rule that's currently in state, as well as it'll only top 8 regardless of the size of the event. These are important considerations when building your deck because you're going to address whether or not if you're going to make it in time, and whether or not you need to take notes, and whether or not you anticipate having a good Swiss bracket and tiebreakers good enough to accommodate for the lack of a top 16. Let's take those one at a time. When you're talking about Go Format rules with 45 minutes and 0, 1, 2, 3, you can play a control deck and feel more confident in your ability to end the game because you have a little bit extra time and a few more turns if it goes to time to be able to grind out those strategies. However, if you're playing into an event that follows Konami policy of 50 minutes and no end of match procedures, then you'd feel less inclined to play a control deck if you're worried about playing in the time. This also applies to decks you're just not comfortable with. If this is your first time playing GOATs and you want to pick up a really complicated deck, say something like a Toon Chaos RGT or an FTK like Empty Jar, you're going to take time to read the cards and understand how the combos work out. And so if you don't have that practice and those reps in before the event, you're more likely to play slower at the event. And that's just from learning the deck. So you want to make sure that if you're picking a deck that you are interested in playing, that you get the reps in beforehand if the event's going to be a 50-minute with no end of match procedure. Now we're going to talk about top 8 versus top 16 and what that matters and why that matters for a GGP versus a Konami policy event. And that's because when you have a GGP, you have typically less Swiss rounds accommodated for the number of participants, and you have to have good enough breakers to make it into your top cut. The issue then becomes is when you're restricted to only a top 8 setting, they're going to accommodate this by having more Swiss rounds. What that means for you as a player is a lot more physical and mental fatigue. If you're able to handle those extra couple rounds to try and keep winning up matches to strengthen or make better tiebreakers, then that's something you need to consider when picking a deck. Can you play a deck that's very complicated and requires a lot of thought process? Are you able to play turbo mirrors all day and be able to go through those interactions one by one every round? Or would you rather play something a little more laid back like Warriors, or play something like Burn where you're able to just kind of sit and respond to the opponent in your own fashion? So it's something to consider when you're playing out these rounds. Another thing too to consider is the tournament structure. Most often IRL events are going to be Swiss rounds followed by a top cut. However, sometimes there'll be either single elimination or sometimes double elimination, and you'll see that online more often. If you're going into a single elimination event versus a Swiss round and top cut event, you might want to consider a deck that's more resilient in a single elimination setting than a Swiss setting. So that'd be a deck that you know you can clear games 1, and 2 with pretty quickly and pretty effectively, versus being able to play something that you can have a little stronger resistance in Swiss, but you might not win as many games. In a single elimination setting, you can play a deck like Burn that takes games pretty quickly and doesn't brick as often as other decks. The last thing we'll talk about is certain rulings. It depends on what your TO is going to say. If it's a Go Format event, they're following everything on GoFormat.com, all their rulings, and those are posted on their website. However, if they're not going to follow those rules and they're going to follow either updated or sometimes whatever the judge rules that day is what applies, then you're going to have to consider those as well. And that's something to consider when you're building a deck and you're deciding and you're putting in tech cards for your deck, is to make sure that the ruling that how the card works that you think it does actually is how the card's going to work in Go Format. And that brings us to our final part. What deck should you play? Now it really matters what your play style is. If you're typically a more aggressive player, you're going to aim for those Burn, Warrior, and or RGT style decks. However, if you're more interested in technical play, then you definitely aim toward a Control or Chaos Turbo style strategy. Now there's all sorts of strategies you can play in Go Format that complement every duelist's style and technical play. It's just a matter of determining what best fits your needs in consideration for the event. Now, for example, if I were to play in the next Go Format event, then I would consider these 3 things. I would consider number 1 that Chaos Turbo will be the most represented deck there, and I would like to play a deck that does well against that. So that's the first thing I'm considering. Number 2, I'm going to consider if it's going to be a GGP event that follows Go Format rules, or if it's going to be a Konami style event that's going to follow Konami policy. And if it's something like that, then I'm going to pick a deck that can win games pretty quickly. I don't play very slow in general. However, I'd like to play a deck that can pick up the pace and speed up the format just enough so that I'm able to play in such a way that I can end games efficiently, quickly, and swift. And then probably the most important thing that I'm considering when I'm picking a deck for the metagame is what am I most comfortable with. I'm more comfortable with aggressive strategies, as that's more to my style of gameplay. And for example, I've topped 2 GGPs myself with the burn strategy because that's just what my forte is. However, going into this season and knowing that Go For My Worlds has just ended, burn took up a lot of the slots and is going to be on everybody's radar, it is not going to be the best time to play burn in any of these events coming up. So I would actually play something more along the line of the warrior strategy and or a reasoning gate strategy. These are decks that do well against Chaos Turbo. These are decks that allow for technical side choices that you're able to catch the opponent off guard, as well as fit my play style and play rather quickly into whatever time rules that the tournament is going to set. I'm also considering specific side deck choices. Most recently, I've seen a lot of people end up side decking scapegoats in their list as a way to combat very aggressive decks that are able to just slam out a bunch of damage in one turn, as well as having a card like Jinzo or Royal Decree up, and it's a way to kind of blank a lot of that damage. So in consideration, I've seen a lot of people also side Gakugiri Panda in their side deck as a way to counteract the scapegoat that's coming out from all sorts of strategies. Doesn't matter what strategy it is, you can counteract that with your own Gakugiri Panda. Decks that can take advantage of that is already Panda Burn, which plays that card, but more importantly, a deck like Warriors or Earth Aggro can also play that card to help aid in their strategies because they often lose to control decks, and being able to have that counter to the counter is making sure that you're one step ahead of your opponent. This is just a quick glimpse into the metagame, into the considerations, and into what deck I might play in the event, but you have to take all these into consideration and think about what deck you should play at the next Go For Met event. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to leave a comment, like, and subscribe, and let me know what you guys think. Comment down below what next Go event you're going to. Maybe I'll see you guys there, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.